Hello and welcome to Buzz About, discussions with skilled professionals about how they got there and why they do it. All recorded here at 15 North Studio in Phoenixville, Pennsylvania. Hey everybody, welcome to Buzz About. My name is Bert.
I'm Megan.
And today we are talking about Chiptunes. We have an artist here named Levi Buffum. Levi, how's it going, man?
It's going well. Thanks for having me.
Great. And so just to get us started, what is Chiptunes?
At its base, it's basically making music with old computer hardware, and that includes old video game systems. So a lot of artists will do it. It kind of started on the Commodore 64 and then kind of worked its way up from there. So that became a big scene back in the 80s, and then it progressed from there.
Is that always involving like video game systems?
For a lot of people, yeah, but some people will go so far as to make music with an old PC speaker that only has that one tone. So people get really creative with it. But anything that's electronic and makes like bass level sound waves is kind of fair game, and people just find a way to hack it and reprogram it or whatever to make music. And
how would you like just describe the sounds? Like obviously they sound like they're from video games, right?
Yeah, I mean bleeps and bloops tends to cover it for the most part. There's also noises, buzzes, but basically if it sounds like R2-D2, it's probably chiptunes.
Cool, that's cool. And so you personally, how long have you been creating using this medium?
So I kind of started out just imitating it, either with samples or plugins. But sometime around like the late 2000s is when I actually acquired hardware and the means to manipulate the sound chips in the actual hardware.
That was my next question. Like, how are you manipulating them? How are you creating music out of it?
So there's, some very creative, very intelligent people that along the way kind of figure out how to, as I said before, hack the systems. So they'll figure out how to control the sound chips the way the old system would, but they find also a way to translate something standard like a MIDI signal, which is what a lot of musicians use to control external hardware, whether it's like a synthesizer or a drum kit or something like that. So basically, they found a way to translate that MIDI signal to the language that the various systems can understand. So I don't do that. I don't take it to that level.
Yeah.
I have done like minor modifications on my systems to make them sound better or make them look cooler. But generally speaking, someone else is creating these peripherals, and I'm just finding that peripheral online. Every like 5 to 10 years, someone releases a new thing to control a new thing, and I'll always get my hand on it, experiment with it, and then just see what I can do with it.
Oh, that's super cool.
Sure. So along the way, you've been able to basically, what you're saying is like procure different ways of making these sounds.
Yeah.
Okay, cool. Yeah. So I went over to Levi's house, and he has a really cool setup. It's literally a Nintendo system, an original Nintendo system, and a Game Boy system, and they both have cartridges in them, and the cartridges have cables that run to where do they go from there?
Either to the peripheral or to a MIDI control box, and then that goes to the computer. So I'm programming everything on the computer or scoring. It's a little bit of both, and then that's all being sent through the MIDI device to both of them.
And then you have software on the computer that reads these signals as instruments, or?
Well, they're playing directly from the sound chips. So when I'm sending MIDI signals to the systems, they're coming out. So what I played for you while we were there was coming directly from the Nintendo and the Game Boy.
Wow, that's cool.
So when I record it, I have to feed that back into the computer, the audio signal, and then I can record it and split the tracks up and make the final cut for that.
Are you only working with Nintendo and Game Boy? Do different systems produce different sounds?
Yeah. So while all the systems produce sound in a similar way, they all have different hardware, and the different hardware leads to either a slightly or greatly different sound depending on how it was constructed. Sometimes they have capabilities that other systems didn't. So, for example, the Commodore 64, which is big in the chiptune scene back in the day, has a couple different capabilities that the Nintendo and the Game Boy don't have. So you get some sounds out of them that sound a little different.
Yeah.
So I have experimented with the Commodore 64. It was one that I wanted to include on one of my previous albums, but I couldn't really get the hang of it the way that I already do with the Nintendo and the Game Boy. So I just felt like I wanted to make the most of it whenever I did use it. So that's probably for a future project at this point.
Now, to me, this sounds like, not to be offensive here, but outdated.
Yeah.
So, like, is there like a nostalgia feel for this whole thing? Like getting on the Nintendo?
Absolutely, yeah.
Where along the way of your journey in video games and life did you stumble across chiptunes?
I mean, so I've always kind of had a fondness for the music from Nintendo and Game Boy games. At the time, obviously wasn't nostalgia because it was happening in the present. It was the newest technology at the time. But I've been composing and playing piano for most of my life. My mom and my grandfather were both musicians, so it kind of runs in the family. So at some point, probably in my early teens or sometime in middle school, before that, my mom got a MIDI program on her computer, so I would kind of mess around with that, and I always gravitated towards the sounds that sounded like the old video game sounds. And then as time went by and vintage video games kind of made a comeback in like the actual gaming scene, that's when a lot of these video game cover bands started coming out, and a lot of people started getting into chiptunes, and a lot of people started making the peripherals that a lot of us use. So I've been kind of making chiptunes since I was, in middle school, but I've only actually been making chiptunes for the last decade and a half.
If it was available when you were younger, you would have totally been doing it.
I probably would have, yeah. But I probably would have electrocuted myself trying to open my Nintendo and mess around with it.
Yeah.
Which is something I actually did do back in the day with an old Space Invaders game, one of those LCD screens or whatever. I think Jude also, my brother, actually accidentally electrocuted himself at some point with this little system.
Be careful, everybody.
Yeah, you got
chiptunes is dangerous.
Don't let your kids open up old technology
without parental supervision.
Yeah, exactly.
So using this technology, you have essentially created albums that are printed on vinyl. You have 3 previous albums that are already out on vinyl. How do you go from beeps and boops to music that can define an album?
There's definitely a process. I'm not going to get on the technical details. But generally speaking, I'll take an album. They're all cover albums. So it kind of starts with do I love this album? And if I love an album enough, I've probably listened to it hundreds of times, if not thousands. Because that's kind of the way I listen to music. I like a whole album at once. I don't just like having a mix with different tracks. Totally. So I'll just get into an album and I'll listen to it for 3 months to a year at a, before I even discover or listen to other music. So that's usually what will happen is it'll be an album that I've had that experience with and one that I love a lot. And then, when it comes to actually taking the bleeps and bloops and making them musical, there's a number of different ways to manipulate the sound chip. So, your basic tone is just a straight kind of boring thing, but you can add a vibrato to it. You can do a pitch bend. You can mess with the volume. And then there are other parameters that change the way the sounds come out slightly, either a thicker or a thinner sound by changing the kind of the width of the sound wave that's being produced.
Is there a specific type of music that you're particularly inspired by? Is there a genre that you go towards, or?
I mean, I think all of my albums at this point were either indie or alt rock. Covers of those albums. As far as inspiration for the actual chiptunes I'm creating, it would be the original album in that case. I don't necessarily have a style, I guess, when it comes to chiptunes, because the style is the genre, basically.
Yeah.
And I don't even know if I'd call it a genre because it's basically just everybody using the same instrument. It's equivalent to a bunch of people doing acoustic guitar albums, but they have different guitars and calling calling those different albums. You know what I mean?
Sure.
Or different genres rather. So it's kind of a matter of just taking the source of the music and trying to recreate the feel of that album in and of itself, as opposed to doing it in my style. Because the style kind of creates itself as a matter of what I'm using.
Sure, and not even talking about financial successes and things like that, and making money off of making music. But do you find, personally speaking, do you find that this is a successful thing? When you complete that album, are you this is something tangible that I worked really hard on? Talked about that feeling, completing an album.
Yeah, no, it's definitely a good feeling, and it's definitely not financially motivated. Sure. I mean, I do run Kickstarter campaigns in order to fund the press on vinyl, but I could very easily just create digital releases at no cost to me, aside from maybe, replacing a part in my Nintendo once every 5 to 10 years,
Yeah.
So it's definitely not a financial incentive, but I like the idea of creating something and putting it out there, and putting it on vinyl allows it to become a physical, tangible thing for people. And especially with vinyl, making a resurgence, it's I think a large part of the reason why people like collecting vinyl is because they miss having that physical medium. Yep. And as to why CDs or audio tapes didn't make as large of a comeback, I guess that's up to the historians to decide. But, vinyl is the thing that I think it's, for a lot of people, it's this is what my parents had or my grandparents, and there's an interest there. And also just like the time period when that became like music was mass produced. That's where records kind of came in. So
Yeah.
it also provides a lot more real estate for artwork and
Totally.
and
well,
packaging. And that's a
speaking
big part
of-
of it for me too.
Yeah. All right, cool. So these are your physical albums, your previous albums. I don't know what order they're in, or I apologize.
I think put that one in the back, and then
Oh, is that the back one? Okay.
so that would be the first one in the behind. There you go. That's the first
Nailed
one.
it. Okay, cool. So let's talk about, so you got all of these finished and completed via like Kickstarter funding.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, great. Let's talk about like that process. Like, how do you get, you know what I mean? Like even the idea of doing this and, you know, trying to find the funds from friends and whoever wants to advertise for you to make a completed album.
So I got a shout out to my friend Paul Miles. So way back in the day, before vinyl was really coming back, I was making Chiptunes, but I was just doing digital releases, and he was like, "Oh, you should like cover a Death Cab for Cutie album and put it on vinyl. Hipster would eat that shit up."
Yeah.
And he was just like, he was thinking like a little like sarcastically, but he also like, you know, enjoyed stuff I had done before, and that idea just kind of sat with me for about a decade. And then I had been listening to In the Airplane Over the Sea by Neutral Milk Hotel, kind of on repeat, as I've mentioned before. That's how I listen to albums. And I was just like, you know, this might make a good chiptune album, you know, a la that advice that suggestion that Paul made back in the day. So I just decided to go for it, and I did. And I was like, okay, let me see how much it costs to put it on vinyl, because I was thinking about maybe just paying for it up front and how I had done other albums, you know, in that way. But then I was like, you know what, it's pretty pricey, especially if I only do 100 copies or 300 copies.
Sure.
The cost per copy goes way up the smaller the run is. So I decided to launch Kickstarter, put the goal at like 5,000, just be like, okay, you know, we can do that. My buddy Dan helped me out. He's done some Kickstarters. He helped me create the video to you know, kind of market the Kickstarter. And I just kind of joined all these communities, either people that like chiptunes, people that like collecting video game music on vinyl. There's actually large groups of people that do that. It's a whole like basement scene kind of a deal.
Yeah.
And then also people that like the original album. And then I kind of just got people to the Kickstarter that way. I didn't really do any kind of marketing. I didn't do Facebook ads or Instagram ads. I ran a few just to kind of test the waters. But at the end of the day, most of the backers that I brought in were people I interacted with at some point on a personal level. Either I shared the artwork or a track in progress. I got some feedback from people, and it just did really well. What's funny is the Facebook ad that I ran, it didn't really bring in a lot of backers, but a guy that saw that ad happened to own a record pressing plant in Athens, Georgia, where Neutral Milk Hotel got their start. So it was kind of like fate and like, you know, the
Kismet.
The planets aligning and all that. And he's like, to this day, he's like one of my good friends, and we're talking all the time. And every time I need a new pressing plant, because he's not working at his anymore, he just like, oh, these guys are doing good work. So basically, one of the jobs he does is he goes around and he sets up record pressing plants.
Wow.
So he's a good guy to know in the business.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah.
Nice. So it takes a little bit of luck too, is what you're saying.
It does take a little bit of luck, but I think at the end of the day, like, you know, obviously you have to reach people, you have to share it, you have to put it out there. But if you're doing something that's fun, or that you just kind of really throw yourself into, people see that. I think it comes through in the work. I think it also comes through in their interaction with you when you're talking about the project.
Yeah, that's
you know,
cool.
there are a lot of people that do Kickstarters, and they'll just be like, "Oh, check out my Kickstarter" when it's launched, and I'm like, that's
Not really any
not
before
gonna
or
help,
after.
you know, at that point, because people haven't seen you, they haven't gotten to know you or your work, and they're like, "Oh, that's neat, I guess." Maybe they'll back, and then they'll decide to cancel at the last minute. Who knows?
So we got Flaming Lips. What album is this?
That's the Neutral Milk Hotel.
And this is back album, right?
Yep.
Cool. How long does it take one of these for you to go from I really want to do this album to all the tracks are complete, I'm super happy with it?
Well, sometimes I come up with the album I want to do a year in advance, but let's say I just came up with it yesterday. I'd probably just jump right in, and I always go in order of the album. So I'll start with track one, then 2, 3, all the way to the end. Once in a while, I'll skip a track if I'm struggling with a part, but usually I go in the order of the album. And it could take anywhere from, each track can take anywhere from 1 day if I'm really in the groove, and this track is structured to kind of allow that quick succession through it. Or I could spend a couple weeks or a month on one track, and the result is generally it takes about 6 months solid to put an album together, like 6 months of actual work, once a day maybe. But that's usually spread out over the course of a year. Sometimes I'll take a break, in the middle of working on an album.
I was gonna say, how long? Like, what's your shortest length, and what is your what album's taken the longest? Are there any
well,
that
the current
are
one
incomplete?
is definitely taking the
I was
longest.
gonna say.
The upcoming one is the one that's taking the longest because I took a nice little break in the middle.
I mean, sometimes it's needed.
Sure. And I also like to point out like the artwork. So
Yeah, that's
when I was at your house, you showed me the process of making the artwork for the new album. Now with regards to this, it is a very meticulous process, as I might say.
Yeah, it doesn't have to be, but I make it so.
Sure, right, to
That's
get
just
it
the way
right, right?
The way I work.
I
yeah.
mean, like that's beautiful. You know what I mean?
Really, I mean, I'm so intrigued by it because it reminds me of pixels. So, when I go in, because I'm a photographer, I go in and I edit an image and I fine tune it. I blow it up to 200 times its size and I can see the pixels on the screen. So when I look at this, that's what I see. But it's very interesting to see it in like a whole scale. So I don't know. How do you tell us about this?
Yeah,
Like
I mean,
the artwork in general. It's
I've
really
actually
cool.
Probably been doing pixel art longer than I've been making music because I was like the very first computer we had with like MS Paint, I would just draw on there. And at that point, computer resolution was so low that
I
that
completely
you could see
forgot
every
about
pixel on
that
the screen.
program.
But also, I liked video games, and I would sometimes I'd even look at my TV and Jude and I would actually recreate pixel art on graph paper when we were really young.
Yeah.
So it's been an interest for a very long time.
Oh, I love
And both
that.
of us
That's
do
cool.
it I've done it semi-professionally as a pixel artist. I've done animation and some other stuff, but Jude's like full-time illustration.
Yeah. Shout out to Jude. He's a very, very cool guy and does some really cool stuff with regards to pixel art.
Yeah. So he's, he and I definitely always shoot ideas off each other, always show each other
That's
works
awesome.
in progress and stuff. I definitely showed him multiple iterations of this and he had some feedback for it. He's never shy about that, not afraid to hurt my feelings. And I'm glad for that.
Totally.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I
That's
don't
what you
want
need. Yeah.
anybody to coddle me, when I'm trying to get, actual criticism of the work I'm doing. I want
Sure.
to do a better job.
That's a good brother.
Yeah.
So, but
I mean, that's what siblings
but it can be
should be for.
meticulous, just by the nature of pixel art, because you're working with a limited screen. So, sometimes it comes down to 1 or 2 pixels that I'm literally adding one and then I'm zooming out, undo, redo, back and forth.
Yeah,
Like,
yeah.
I don't know which one I like better. Like that's the level of detail that no one else is ever going to notice. But
Sure.
it's just the way that I work and I have to be satisfied to that level.
Totally.
I was very intrigued by the shading on the images. I don't know, just the amount of detail that you put towards it.
Yeah.
I noticed that.
So that's actually a technique
I
called
can
dithering.
see,
So
yeah.
like on really old computers when they only had like 16 or 8 colors, they would, kind of checkerboard a pattern and you can spread that out a little more and create a more, more smooth looking image. Not obviously not when you're looking up close, but you kind of give the impression there's more going on with the colors and the shading than there actually is.
Yeah,
You
it's a
can see the
beautiful setup.
movement. Yeah.
Pixel artists, nowadays we have billions of colors, but we use those techniques to call back to when they had to do that because that was the only option for creating certain images.
And so, new album.
Yeah.
You have another Kickstarter lined up.
So I actually brought the original just to
Cool.
kind of. So there's the cover for the new album right there. It's Sufjan Steven's album, and it's there's the original behind it, so you can kind of get a side-by-side comparison to see how I, do my best to recreate the original cover, but sometimes I put a little spin on it. So the original, this artist is very well known for their style of artwork, and I made a couple attempts to kind of recreate something more akin to that, but I was like, that's his illustration style. I kind of want to do things my way, so I kind of went with like a old video game, kind of side scroller city skyline that spans the front and the back of the album.
That's pretty awesome. Yeah, it looks great. Again, back to the meticulous process that I saw. He put every one of those buildings in Photoshop and then went through and made all the lights and all the pixels and everything that you see based on the skyline that he made in Photoshop.
That cover
I'm
took about 2 weeks, I'd say.
I'm
it was
really
wild.
so intrigued by the artwork. It's really neat to look at.
Sure. And wait, just to pause, Doctor Octoroc. Let's talk about that. Where
Yeah.
did you? Where did that come from? As obviously it's your artist nickname as a.
Yeah, it's so originally when I first got into kind of composing on a computer with samples. The first time I opened up Fruity Loops back in the day,
Yeah.
I was using samples and plugins and stuff like that. And I was kind of listening to a lot of Juno Reactor and Crystal Method and like Chemical Brothers and stuff like that back.
Yeah.
So I was just like going all in on like the house, trance, electronic type music. So my original kind of aspiration, I guess you could call it, was to like do house and trance and stuff like that and DJ in all these clubs. But I did all these like, all those genres versions of video game tracks. So
Sure.
I could do like the Legend of Zelda theme, make it sound like something that Chemical Brothers might put out or whatever. And then in going that direction, I was trying to come up with a name, and one of my favorite games of all time is, you could probably tell from all my tattoos that are Legend of Zelda themed, is the Legend of Zelda. So I was kind of thinking of, kind of like one of the enemies from the game, or just something maybe more or less obscure in the game that wouldn't be a direct call to the game series. And Octoroc was the first thing that kind of, because I was like, oh, that rhymes like doctor. So originally I wanted to be like DJ Doctor Octoroc.
That would have been
That's a lot.
But actually, no, I somehow
It sounds
forgot.
pretty infamous.
I kind of,
cool, yeah,
I kind of forgot actually. Before that, even I wanted to start a video game cover band where I played piano, and I also had 3 other guys: a bassist, a guitarist, and a drummer. And that's how I came up with that name. So Octo being 8. So we have 8 legs between us, or 8 arms between us.
Sure.
There's 88 keys on a piano, and we were gonna do like a piano rock style, like kind of Ben Folds or Keen, that kind of style.
Wow.
So that's where the Octoroc name came from. And then I basically put the doctor in front of it.
Cool.
When I wanted to be a DJ, and then I just dropped the DJ, because I'm not a DJ. And just stuck with the Doctor Octoroc, and then that's been kind of moving me forward ever since.
Wow, that's pretty cool. Yeah.
Are you still into playing video games? Are you still pulling inspiration from other like game systems, or when you you really like Zelda? Is that do games help influence your music?
So oddly enough, I rarely play Zelda. Basically, is the only game I play anymore. So every time there's a new Zelda game, that's pretty much the only video game that I buy on a regular basis. And I actually still haven't played the most recent one, just because I got a dog at the same time. So I was
That'll do
training
it.
this puppy, and it was too stressful that I just didn't have time. But oddly enough, I don't play a lot of video games, and I guess because most of my inspiration comes from games that are over 20 or 30 years old, it doesn't really change where the influences might come from. I do still listen to a lot of video game soundtracks, however. So on the music side of things, I enjoy that and might pick up some inspiration there. But for the most part, I rarely play games, and people are very surprised because like everything I do, art, music-wise, has some sort of a connection to video games, and they're just like, "Wait, you're not a gamer?" I was like, "Not really. Never really was."
Sure.
I mean, I was a kid that played games a lot, but I would never really have called myself a gamer, so to speak.
There's few of us left. That album, the new one. Why that album? Why did you cover Illinois, which is a great album? I'm a big fan of the song Chicago. It was on a playlist that I had playing when I contacted you and about this, and so I was instantly enamored with what you're doing. Why that album?
I mean, so each album I've covered kind of has a story behind it. You know, the Nutrimilk Hotel one is where it began, so it doesn't have much of a story. I was just like, I really like this album. I think it would be cool Chiptunes. And then when I went down to Athens to pick up the records, after getting them pressed, I walked into a record shop, and I was kind of thinking, what do I want my next album to be? And came across The Soft Bulletin by Flaming Lips, and was like, oh, this would make a great thing. And then it was something similar when I decided to do the Beck album.
Yeah.
I was, I just finished up the Kickstarter for that, and I was up in Downingtown, and they had a record shop I popped into, and I was like, oh, like I saw Sea Change sitting there. So when it came to this one, however, it was a little different. Little over 4 years ago, I moved into a new place, and I'd recently become salaried with my full-time work. So still working from home, but I just was like struggling to get into my morning routine. And so I had heard Illinois back when it came out in 2004 or 2005, 2005 it came out. So kind of around the mid 2000s is when I listened to it a lot. I had it on my iPod and whatnot. But I kind of came back into the light when I started this job, and I was getting this routine, and I would just listen to it on loop. And it was like the track list just kind of naturally kept me going all day, and I would play through it, obviously many times each day as I worked my roughly 8-hour day. And it just kind of it kind of grew on me again. So it was like it had grown on me before, but it got lost, in the shuffle because I'm an album guy. I moved on to the next one, and then I just came back to it, and I was just like listening to it nonstop. I was like, I think I want this one to be my next cover album.
Awesome. Any thoughts? So you said when the other album finished and the press was done, you went to the record store and were immediately looking for inspiration. How soon Are you looking for inspiration for another one already, or?
So what I'll usually do is when I'm kind of wrapping up one album, I'll start looking through like lists of like the top albums from this year. So I generally try to hit the 20th anniversary of the album.
Oh, that's cool.
When I release it. So it was never a plan from the beginning, but when I did the Nutrimilk Hotel one, it was 2019, and I was like, oh, it came out in 98. If I had done it a year earlier, it could have hit the 20th anniversary. So I was like, okay, I'll do that for the Flaming Lips one. Then it just took me longer to work on it, so it ended up being pushed back to 2020. Then COVID happened, so then it ended up being pushed back to 2021. So I was like, all right, the next one, I'm going to hit the 20th year anniversary. And I got it. With the Beck album, I got it. And I was like, okay, so now, from now on, I have to hit that 20th anniversary.
Cool.
And I think part of that is also because of like the time frame between the time the album comes out. It's just like the age group that would have been listening to that, if I was listening to it, is more likely to be the age group that were playing Nintendo back in the 80s and 90s. Huh. So there's that overlap. And I'm like, I want to find that overlap between people that will appreciate the album. If I cover a jazz album, I'm sure there'll be people that enjoy it, but you probably won't find the same kind of overlap you would between that and an album that came out in the 90s or the early 2000s.
Love the thought process behind that. Like, it's very meticulous, as is everything else with you.
But like a lot of things I do, it started kind of accidentally or incidentally, so to speak.
So you said you're looking at music that are like hits today and already planning for...
What, 20 years from now?
Yeah. Is that what I heard? Or
No, he has a really long
exactly.
journal.
Okay.
The journal goes on for years.
What is the future of this for you?
Yeah, I honestly, there was a part of me that, because this album is by far the greatest undertaking. It's 22 tracks. It's over 70 minutes long, whereas previous albums were like 12, 13 tracks and under an hour. So it definitely wore on me a little stronger. And also just the content on the album. There's like insane orchestrations going on this album. Mm-hmm. So it's a lot to kind of put into like a limited medium like Chiptunes, where you only get like 5 to 10 channels, depending on how many systems you're using.
Yeah.
So, that's one of the challenges I enjoy, but it also takes its toll. So at a certain point, I was like, I think this might be my last album. I think this is going to be my swan song or whatever.
Yeah.
But now that I'm done it, at least the composing portion of it, and I'm, going to the Kickstarter, I'm like, you know what, I kind of want to do more. So my original plan was kind of do 10, maybe just have a nice round number. Yeah. And then just call it a day maybe, but we'll see.
When is the Kickstarter live?
So it's going to go live first week in July. So the original album came out on July 4th. I'm still debating whether or not I want to actually launch it on July 4th. Yeah. Just because it's a national holiday. I'm not sure if that would be good or bad for a first day launch. With a Kickstarter, you generally try to get it funded in the first day if you can.
Sure.
And then it gets that momentum, it gets visibility on the website, and it's more likely to get picked for like a feature and get you more backers. So, I have a lot of really cool stretch goals planned. So the goal is 10,000, but I'm trying to get it up to 15 or more, so we can get like gatefold jackets, get a bonus track, get extra inserts and stuff like that. Yeah,
you're really good at this Kickstarter thing because he adds things on if you get more backers, right? Is that how it works? Or more money?
More funding you get. You get stretch. And I also have add-ons. So having 3 previous albums, people can add that when they're supporting the campaign. And then the top tier of the campaign is basically my entire discography up to this point, including this album.
Wow.
Yeah, could you even make these little like stickers and stuff too for the?
So that was just kind of an afterthought for that first album. I just was like, I'll throw in a fun sticker when we get to 9,000 or something like that,
Yeah.
And then I found out that a large group of people that collect video game soundtracks on vinyl. It's a very niche group, but there's a lot of people that do this, and they probably make up half of my backers at this point.
Yeah.
And I only learned about them through creating that first album, and now they're like, it's like I'm always in there like, hey guys, what do you think of this? So I did a little poll. And resoundingly, they prefer stickers over posters, inserts, and any other kind of extra to come for that album. I'm like, okay, everything's getting stickers from now on.
That's cool.
Stickers are very popular
right
now.
Yeah.
It's easy to just stick on a water bottle.
I'm still waiting to see one of those stickers on like somebody's guitar case out in the wild. But, I mean, I get like 100 to 200 backers per campaign, so it's not a great chance.
You never know.
You never know. Yeah, true.
Ozzy Osbourne's tour case will have a Dr. Octoroc official sticker on the next one. So say there's somebody who's into music, who's into nostalgia, who's into video games, and they want to try Chiptunes. I've always wanted to create music. This sounds really cool to me. What's like a first step? Like, how do you get involved in this?
I mean, the first step would be whether or not you want to make chiptunes like with the actual hardware, or whether or not you just like the sound of the music and want to play around. Because if it's the latter of the two, you can just get a couple plugins. throw some sounds together and see how it likes. If you want to kind of adhere to the kind of limitations that you're forced to with the hardware, then you can just, look up like the channels that are on a Nintendo or the channels that are on a Game Boy or the channels that are on a Commodore 64, and then just limit yourself in your compositions that way. And that's how I started out doing it. I was like, I'm not using a real Nintendo. I'd like to, but I didn't have the hardware to do it at the time. So I was just like, but I'm still going to adhere to those limitations so that it's at least more authentic to what it would sound like. Because back in the day, my kind of goal was to make it sound like a video game. These days, I'm more inclined to just use these systems as instruments. And I don't think about whether or not it sounds like it could be a video game track. I say that for my friends when they're listening to the album after the fact. I'm like, oh, this one sounds like a cave. I'm walking through a cave or something. But I find that by shifting that focus, it allows me to kind of at least remove one of the limitations of trying to make it sound like it's a video game track, which would inherently lead me to, maybe add a drum beat where one doesn't belong, or add something more blippy when I want it less blippy. If that represents the original album better.
You said you played piano. Is that something you still do?
Very rarely.
Yeah.
What's funny is I have a couple musician friends that still play. A couple of them play around in media, and if I just show up with my keyboard, I'll be like, oh yeah, come on, and I'll just play with him. And that's kind of the only thing I'll do these days. I don't even have a piano set up in my house currently to play, and I'm definitely feeling the consequences of that. Where I'm just like, I don't know if I could play this Ben Folds song anymore. Like I used to know, like the back of my hand. So I've been thinking lately, like I should set up a piano and get back into that.
I was just intrigued by your statement of like you're using them as instruments more as like you're viewing the sounds more as an instrument instead of like a video game or like a sound. So I was just intrigued by that, like what your music background is.
Yeah.
Like how that lent to where you are now.
I mean, it's mostly piano, but there was a brief time in between the electronic stuff and the mostly chiptunes that I do now that I got some orchestral plugins because I also very much enjoy like orchestral soundtracks to movies. Grew up in like the peak of John Williams after Star Wars, of course. That's John Williams' peak, but like I'm talking Jurassic Park, Hook. The 90s had some of the best themes outside of the Star Wars universe, that John Williams ever produced. So it was kind of one of those things where one of my ideas back in the day was I want to do an album that's like different like soundtrack composers doing the theme for this video game or that video game. So I'd have like Hans Zimmer covering, the Metal Gear theme, and like John Williams covering, Life Force or, whatever, just random Nintendo games. I was trying to pair them up but I just couldn't really... I couldn't make it sound as good as I wanted it because the plugins have a tendency to sound electronic and not sound organic like an actual orchestra. So I have done a lot of orchestral pieces, and I have a couple of them even up on my YouTube along with the chiptunes. It's just I didn't really dive headfirst into it like I did with the chiptunes. I just decided not to go that direction, and part of me is glad I did. But make that decision. But part of me is like, it still would have been fun to do that album.
Sure. Yeah, you totally.
I don't know like how Danny Elfman would have covered the Monster Party theme or whatever,
Sure, yeah. Yeah, that's a pretty cool idea. That's a stretch. That's got to be tough, man, to just match an energy of a composer for, a video game that you might be familiar with, but how, it's tough to decide how familiar you are with that composer to fit into this style of a game.
I mean, it's definitely like there's certain notes you got to hit, not literal notes, but like, certain vibes you got to hit in the, because when you hear a Danny Elfman piece, you're like, I know that's Danny Elfman. And it's the same thing with like John Williams, Hans Zimmer. A lot of them have like a very distinct style. But I also, part of the problem I ran into with that one was like, but how many composers do I really know that well?
Right. That's
like Bill Conti, like do a Rocky style,
Mike Giacchino. You told me before with regards to chiptunes, there's levels to it, essentially. Like you can take the recorded sounds and put them in Pro Tools or whatever and line it up and make music. What's like the difficulty from one to the other? Like from the hardest things that you're doing in this to the easiest?
So I'd say when it comes to the most difficult, there's just certain parts of certain songs where I'm just trying to find the right combination. Because, I don't have a wide, varied, sound library to work from as if I was composing a track using plugins or whatever. But there are different capabilities. So each channel is a little different. Some channels don't even get volume control. Some of them don't have, a kind of a clean transition between notes. So
Sure.
the Game Boy, for example, is known in the chiptune community. Most people who do chiptunes nowadays, I'd say pretty safely that most people use Game Boys. And a lot of them kind of will incorporate the fact that there's like a little bit of a click that comes with a note on, note off signal when you're, sending signals to the Game Boy
Sure.
or playing out of the Game Boy for that matter. They'll design their track around those clicks and have like a snare hit or a kick
Oh yeah.
to kind of cover those up. Whereas I'm covering albums, so if I have a slow song that's just an acoustic guitar and a vocal, I don't really have the option. I mean, I could do a more creative cover of the song in that sense, but because my goal is to kind of recreate the vibe and the feel of the original album, I want to keep that song somber if it's originally somber instead of making it upbeat just to cover up a couple clicks. So, I'd say the most mundane and like arduous process is cleaning up the audio. So when I go to record it, I'll record every single channel separately. But because these are old video game systems that weren't created to create sound for recording, there's a hum in the background, there's a high-pitched something, and these are things that you definitely will hear in the headphones anytime there's a break between notes. So I basically go through each channel one at a time and just manually insert silences between every note that's playing. Oof. And I'll even go so far as to overlap some of the click sounds so it's not as harsh on the ears. So that's probably the hardest part. I wouldn't say it's the most difficult, like intellectually to wrap my head around.
Sure.
As much as like figuring out how to recreate a certain part that's really tricky with the medium. But it's definitely the process that if I could automate and send it to AI and have it turn out just as good as I can do it, I would do that in a heartbeat. Otherwise, no.
And going back to being knowledgeable with music, you're obviously speaking about composers and understanding styles of composers, and you've played piano in your past. How important is it for somebody to have a background like that to be able to create songs in general? I mean...
Yeah, I mean, basic understanding of, scales and notes, but honestly, some people, I don't read music at all. So I understand the notes on a staff. I know what they are, generally speaking. Never learned to sight read, no matter how many piano teachers have tried to get me to do that.
That's such a surprising
I've had my fair share of piano
me,
teachers over the years. So obviously if you have an ear for music, you can just jump right into it. It's not, it's not rocket science, but you do have to have a basic understanding of music.
Sure.
But obviously, the more you know about music, the better you'll be able to take that and put it into a composition or an arrangement of sorts. And even though I don't fully understand music theory, at the end of the day, having an ear allows me to kind of pick up things where somebody who's a trained musician and went to school for music and all that will be like, oh, he did this thing here. I can't even think of an example because I know that little about the actual terms and everything that goes into music theory. But I'd say for you're just average person that's maybe they're not music at all, they don't know how to read music. You can just throw some notes down and just see how it sounds, and if you'll know if it sounds bad, probably. If you don't, then you probably shouldn't be in music at all. But if you know well enough, if you listen to enough music to know what you like in terms of different sounds and melodies, and then you can try harmonies, and then you're putting chords together. You're
figuring it
from
out.
Scratch. You just figure it out. That's how I do everything, really. I didn't go to school for music or programming or anything that I do when I make albums.
Tell me about it.
No, I was going to say I feel like that's how all creatives get into their creative field. Is
I went to school for architecture originally. That was my original major, and then I dropped out after 2.5 years. So I actually never graduated college, and I'm making music and illustrating patents. So
that's cool. All right, cool. So new Kickstarter is I don't know how to say his name. How do you say his name?
Sufjan Stevens.
Sufjan Stevens, Illinois. It'll be Illi-NES. How do people find your Kickstarter?
You just go on Kickstarter and type in Illi-NES, ILI-NES.
Great.
You'll find it.
And to find you online, are you Instagram and stuff like that?
Yeah, I mean, you'll find Doctor Octoroc. If you just do a Google search for Doctor Octoroc, all C's, no K's. You'll find all the social media coming up. My website will come up too, even though I haven't updated it in 5 years. But I do have a Bandcamp as well, so you'll find the Bandcamp among those links. Or you'll find all my links.
And you said your new album that you're planning on launching July 4th?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Kickstarter.
That'll be the date. Probably 10 a.m. if I had to guess. I don't know if anybody wants to jump on.
Exactly.
Get that top tier. The Doctor Octoroc collection is the top tier, where it's my entire discography on vinyl.
Well, Levi, thanks again for coming by the studio today.
Yeah, appreciate you having me.
Great. This has been The Buzz About Chiptunes. Thank you very much for tuning in. Please subscribe on all platforms for future episodes. If you'd like your podcast recorded or need a space for filming, please visit 15northvideo.com for more information.